You got the touch. You got the power. Yeah!
Hello and welcome to But I Digress, where sometimes my mouth goes faster than my brain. I'm Nathan, call me Nate Marchand, and in this video I'll be highlighting some of my experiences at the latest convention that I've attended, which was Tricon. Which was held September 25th through 27th at the Holiday Inn in Evansville, Indiana. This was the first year for this con, but I've been aware of it since about this time last year, because I know some of the organizers, since they're fellow members of Fans for Christ and the Christian Gamers Guild. They were trying to get me to come about this time last year, actually, but I wasn't sure I wanted to commit because I didn't know if I would be able to go because I thought I might be starting grad school around this time. But once I found out that I wouldn't be starting this fall, I got a hold of them and said, hey, I think I'll be able to go. But unfortunately, I had missed out on getting one of the cheaper vendor tables, so I thought, okay, maybe I can go with one of the larger ones. So I got a hold of one of my my writer friends, Nick Hayden, and tried to get him to come with me so we could split the cost of the table. Well, that sparked such a long talk about whether or not that'd be financially feasible that I ended up missing a chance to get, well, one of the larger tables too. So I was kind of figuring that I wouldn't be going to Tricon this year. But then one of the guys who was from Fans for Christ, who was going to be running a promo table there, got a hold of me, said that he wouldn't be able to make it, wanted to know if I could do it. I told him yes. And then a few days later, I found out that one of the other vendors had canceled, and so one of the cheaper vendor tables had become open. Took that as a sign that God really wanted me at Tricon. Yeah, not about to argue with him on that matter. So that's how I got there. It was a smaller convention, maybe 400 people in attendance, which honestly is kind of a cakewalk when you're talking to someone who cut his teeth at conventions at Gen Con, which had between 50 and 60,000 people every year. Regardless, I had a lot of really interesting adventures that I can't wait to tell you about. So without further ado, let's get started. Whoo boy, was day one rough. Evansville is a 5-hour drive for me, which is the farthest I've ever gone for a convention, ever. And I had worked late the night before at my day job. So I made sure to buy a couple of 5-hour energy drinks before I got home that night. And so I had one right before I started my trip, and then I took another one right before I had arrived at the convention, just to keep myself going. So, as you can imagine, my brain was fried. Oh yeah. You combine lack of sleep with an energy drink that's, barely keeping me afloat. I was a really interesting person that day. Because the lack of sleep is the closest I've ever experienced to being drunk. Which honestly would have fit in there because this was quite the party con and there were a few drunks that night while I was there. Anyway, beyond that, got to know my neighbors while I was there on the first day, which is something I always do at a convention. And I kind of had to because this was a really cramped vendor hall. So I prayed for good neighbors and made sure that I got along with them. And I really did. Interestingly, I was sandwiched between a pair of musicians. Professor Shy Guy, who's a chiptunes artist, and a rapper named Steven Tibbs. And then behind me were some arts and crafts people, including the crew from the business Sweet Havens, who were wonderful, and I was glad I got to know them over the course of the 3 days of the convention. Now, after I was done in the vendor's hall, I finally then checked in with the hotel. Now, my friend Scott Loftus from Fans for Christ, who worked at the convention, had made arrangements for me to share a hotel room with some of his buddies, for which I was grateful. So I ended up having complete strangers for my roommates, but we got to know each other fairly well over the course of the convention and became good friends, which was great. Now, when I go to a convention, even as a vendor, I like attending some of the events in the evening, because why not? And as I said, this was definitely a party con, so on Friday night they had what more or less amounted to a rave. Raves aren't really my thing, but I did go attend it for a little while, took some pictures, listened to some of the music, took some video, watched the dancers for a little bit. It was entertaining. Then when I came out, I was intending to go back to my hotel room and then ran into a woman that I had met briefly in the vendor's hall, wanted to talk with me. She was there with her teenage son, and wanted to ask me questions about how to reconcile faith and Christianity with a lot of the things that you see in fandom. And it was a long and involved conversation, and honestly I think it was the most important conversation that I had that weekend. And I really hope that what I said to her was encouraging and would be able to impart some wisdom as best I could to her on that. So if you're watching this video, my heart and prayers go out to you, and I hope things get better for you. I slept in a bit on day 2 of the convention, as you might expect. I intended on cosplaying that day. I had taken my 10th Doctor costume with me. Normally I would try to cosplay on Saturdays, on a Saturdays at a con, but I decided not to do it because of an event I was planning on attending on Sunday, which I'll get to here in a few minutes. And I kind of regret doing that because I ran into some great cosplay photo op opportunities, including a gentleman who was there cosplaying the 12th Doctor, the current Doctor, Peter Capaldi, and he was there promoting another upcoming convention, specifically a Whovian convention that was going to be in Kentucky. So I did kind of regret not cosplaying on Saturday. Regardless, the highlights for me when I wasn't in the vendor's hall selling books was I got to interact a lot with Michelle Speck, I think that's how you say her name, and Chuck Huber, who among other things are cast members from the fan-created web series Star Trek Continues, which I had watched the week before in anticipation of going to this convention. They are wonderful people and very, very enthusiastic about what they're doing, especially Michelle. I mean, you think, I'm crazy on caffeine, you should see her. Anyway, I had a photo op in the morning before I went into the vendor's hall, and then later on, after I was done in the vendor's hall, I went and caught the second half of their Q&A panel where after they had screened the latest episode of the series. I missed out on that, but I got to see them interact with fans and ask them a few questions. Now, I did, however, make sure to go back to my hotel room and watch the new episode on YouTube, so I could talk with them a little bit more the next day about it. Anyway, the last thing that I did was, since I didn't feel like going to yet another 21 and up kind of rave sort of party that was going on, I decided to go check out the alternate event, which was an open play for Cards Against Humanity, which I can tell you right now is not the game for me. However, I did have fun walking around and making a few one-liners and wisecracks about some of the cards that people were playing. So, while I don't like the game, apparently I'm really good at making commentary on it. Perhaps I missed my calling. Day 3 of the convention was the quietest and easiest one, as you might expect. I did wear my 10th Doctor cosplay, and the reason being for that was because the first thing I did after hurriedly checking out and getting all my stuff out of the hotel room, because I found that it needed to be all gone by 11 o'clock, was I attended a steampunk-themed prayer service. I wasn't sure what to expect from that, but I was grateful that there was a prayer service of some kind there. I went there, and there was only about 5 or 6 people in attendance, including me, and it was presided over by, interestingly, an Anglican minister. So I got a little bit of a taste of what an Anglican church service was like, which was very educational for me. I had never been to something like that. And it was really fun. I talked with the minister afterward and convinced him to come back later that afternoon and buy a book for me. Yay! When I wasn't in the vendor hall, I did take a few breaks and wandered around, took a few pictures, as I said. And I went and talked with Michelle Speck one more time and gave her a copy of Pandora's Box as a thank you for coming to the convention, but also because, for whatever reason, the day before during the photo op, she referred to me as a ginger, to which I said, really? I'm not ginger? I always thought of myself as a dark blonde, and more recently decided that I must have red highlights because apparently in the right light, I look like a redhead. I've been getting that a lot lately. Anyway, so it was also a little bit of a joke as to why I was giving her the book, but she was more than happy to have it. So then after that, the vendors hall closed an hour sooner than the rest of the convention, which I really thought was kind of odd. and then I spent the next hour and a half or so packing up, getting all my stuff out of the vendor stall and into the car, doing idiot checks to make sure I got everything, and saying goodbye to everybody. And then came the 5-hour trip home, which was why I had one more bottle of 5-hour energy just in case. Well, there you have it, true believers. The highlights of my time at Tricon 2015. I had a fun time, and I think I would consider going back again next year to sell some more books. If you would like to hear more about my time at the convention, please check out my blog, nathanjsmarchand.com, where I'll be writing a full-length report detailing more of my adventures, including a competition between myself and my co-author and friend Eric Anderson, who was at another convention that weekend, and see who could sell more copies of our devotional book, 42, The Discovering Faith Through Fandom. Who won? Find out on my website. Thanks for joining me this week on But I Digress. This is Nate Marchand, signing off. Well, there you have it, true believers. The highlights of my time at Gen Con. Wrong convention, moron.